we should never have gone back to that cave. We almost died in the flood. We were sure we were going to drown. That should have been a warning not ever to come back. But here we were at the entrance to Fuller Cave. Marty and I were putting on our old Army surplus wetsuits, getting rigged up to head into that cave one more time. We got all suited up. We started down in the entrance sinkhole, and I could feel the cold air rushing out and the smell of cave beyond. And just before we got down to the bottom of the sinkhole, I sliced my finger on a piece of broken glass, right through my leather glove. I pulled off the glove, looked at my finger, and there on the white tip of my finger was a little glistening red drop of blood. Was that an omen? Who knows? But we had no idea what we were getting into. So we headed on down the upper stream passage of Fuller Cave, a nice sculpted canyon. But from time to time, my eyes would glance upward at the leaves and sticks and even logs wedged on the ledges above us, reminding us that this cave flooded frequently. We made our way down over 6,000 feet to the top of the first waterfall. And there we met Gene and Bill, who were waiting for us. They had rigged the first drop, and they were ready to go caving. And as we began to put on our gear, put on our harnesses, and clip on our carabiners and brake bars for the rappel, I reflected back on what brought us here this time. Just a month ago, Bill and Gene and Paul Schultz had found a way through the terminal breakdown below the waterfalls, what we had so long thought was the end of the cave. Bill had gotten down on his back and slithered under a low place with not much airspace, and eventually popped out the other side. And what they found was a huge trunk channel boring on down into the darkness. They followed that for several thousand feet until they began to hear a roaring sound in the distance. And they popped out into a huge room, or a huge trunk channel. It was so large that with their carbide lights, they couldn't even see across the abyss. And there was fog and mist there too. It was a strange place. They climbed up on top of a mud mountain after fording the stream, and they couldn't even see the ceiling. It was like the void at the center of the earth. They were psyched up and shaken up and raring to go for another trip. So here we were a month later at the top of the waterfalls, getting ready for our descent. And this time the plan was to go to that big room they had found and then head downstream in what must have been a huge trunk channel. We figured there would be miles of cave ahead. Well, it turns out we had only 2 of those wetsuits that weekend. They were Army surplus and we'd borrowed them. And so Bill and Gene were just in their nylon coveralls. I guess they had fishnet underwear under those. And they were getting cold, but figured they could go further. There is one thing, though, that we did not know. Only Bill knew. When Bill in Richmond had gone by to pick up some cave gear from Paul Schultz, who'd been on the previous trip a month ago, Paul said that he had had a dream. And Bill said, well, I haven't got time for dreams. You know, I'm going to be late meeting these guys. Just throw the gear in the car. I got to go. And Paul said, no. Paul put his hand on his shoulder and said, no, you have got to hear this, Bill. I had a dream that I was in the cave by myself. And I started heading down the big passage like was the plan for this weekend. And he went on to tell Bill a very strange and disturbing dream about what happened to him. And at the end, Paul said, it wasn't like any dream I've ever had. It was more like a vision. It was more like I was awake. I was really there. But then at the end, in a panic, I woke up covered with sweat, shaking all over. And I knew I had to tell somebody. So at that point, Bill said, well, thanks, I got to go. Sorry you can't go with us this weekend, Paul. So as we descended the waterfalls and headed on down toward the breakdown, only Bill knew about that dream. Gene and Marty and I had no inkling of what Paul had dreamt about. So it was indeed a long trip through the breakdown. I remember the low airspace. I never liked places like that, but we got through it. The breakdown was complicated, muddy. There were mud banks, but eventually, after another couple of hours, we began to hear a roar in the distance. And we broke out of a portal, and out in front of us was just inky blackness, with a big cave stream crossing in front of us. I'd never been in a place that big. And with our carbide lights and the fog in the room, it was hard to see much of anything. But we forded that creek. We climbed up the mountain on the other side. We put down some flagging tape to know where we had come from, and we got up on the top and we looked around, and it was just looking out into empty space. There was nothing we could focus on. We could hear the stream murmuring way down below, and we could see the fog swirling around, and it indeed was an ethereal place. Well, we were hyped up about heading on downstream, and we asked Bill and Gene if they felt like they could go any further, and they were so psyched up they said, we're not even feeling cold. And by that time they'd been almost completely submerged in water 2 or 3 times. They said, yeah, let's keep going. So we climbed back down that mud mountain, following the tape, got into the stream and started heading downstream, where no one had ever been before. And before too long, that huge room began to have some dimension to it. We could see some walls, but it was a gargantuan passage. It must have still been 50, 60, 70 feet in diameter and high, with mud banks on each side, the stream flowing down the middle. It made a curve to the right and then a gentle curve to the left. And not too far after that, we came around a bend to a very strange scene. There was a lake. The stream flowed out into a lake. But it was not like any cave lake I have ever seen before. The ceiling was low there, maybe only 7 or 8 feet high. The ceiling was flat, and the walls curved down and plunged into the water. It wasn't a big place, maybe 40 feet wide. We could look with our lights across the lake to the far end, maybe 50 or 60 feet, and we could see that there was no outlet. It was quiet there. The water was very still as it flowed into the lake. And there was foam. There was yellow foam, maybe a foot high, floating on the lake. And immediately I had a bad feeling about that place. It just seemed somehow eerie It seemed like death. We heard something and looked over at Bill, and Bill was shaking. And he said, oh my God, what's happening? And we said, man, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And I could feel the goosebumps going up my back. He said, this is what Paul said. We said, what do you mean what Paul said? He said, Paul had a dream. 2 nights ago, Paul had a dream of this place. We thought, how could that possibly be? Paul's never been here. No one has ever been here. Bill said, when I was loading up the car in Richmond, Paul told me about this place, this lake that he visited alone in his dream. He was here in a dream, and he saw it all, the flat ceiling, the walls curving down straight into the water, the lake, the stillness, the foam floating on the water. He dreamed about this. And then Bill looked down at his feet and he said, oh my God. Paul said he was standing on a crescent-shaped sandbar. And so were we. We got to get the hell out of here, said Gene. There's something weird about this. Something bad about this. Something uncanny here. We got to get out of here. There was no argument. We took off as fast as we could back upstream toward that mud mountain. We climbed up on the mud mountain to get oriented, and we just sat there, and everybody was just speechless. But we were all nervous, shivery. And Bill said, we must leave this cave now. Something is wrong. We cannot stay here. Well, Marty and I looked at each other and we said, well, you know, we've got on the wetsuits. We're not cold. We've got equipment here for a 20-hour trip. We're good to go. We're in shape. Why don't we go upstream instead? And I remember Bill saying, don't do it. Don't do it. But we overruled him. And after a while, Bill and Gene headed down that mud mountain. We could see their lights flickering as they crossed the stream. And then they winked out as they headed up into the Fuller Passage for the long trek to the entrance. And somehow it got a lot darker in that big room. Now there were just 2 carbide lights in that massive space. Just Marty and me alone. We looked at each other and said, well, let's get going. We've got some cave to discover here. So we headed down the mountain. When we got in the edge of the stream, you could walk sort of in it or on the edge. In the wetsuits, it didn't matter. And we made our way upstream. And eventually, we got into a large passage that again was 20, 30, 50 feet in diameter or more. Ceiling we couldn't even see most of the time. But as we were sort of leaving the biggest space toward that passage, something began to happen to me. Something that I did not like. I began to get a little bit of tingling in the hair on the back of my neck. And the feeling is, and maybe you've experienced this in the woods at night, or taking the garbage out back late at night, that someone is watching you. And I began to get the feeling, walking along behind Marty in that big dark room with the stream rushing by, that somehow we were not alone. And I tried to push that feeling down, thinking, oh, come on now. You know, he just psyched up about this strange lake and You know, we got cave to explore here. Just let it go. So we went on for probably 20 or 30 minutes, and we sat down on a mud bank, gravel bar mud bank beside the stream. And I will remember this to my dying day. I can see every rock in that mud bank, because when we sat down, Marty turned to me and he said, "Rock, I got something to tell you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I've just got the strangest feeling that something is in here. Something besides us. Something that knows we are here." And I said, "Oh God, Marty, don't tell me that. That's the last thing I want to hear. Don't tell me that." And I could feel myself just quivering, you know, and my hands began to shake a little bit, because that's exactly what I'd been thinking for the last 20 minutes. And he said, "So what are we going to do?" I said, "God knows, I don't know what the shit we're going to do." And we talked and we said, you know what this is? This is sensory deprivation. You know, there are movies about that stuff. It's when they float people in tanks. You've got cotton in your ears, you've got something over your eyes, the water is warm, they close you in there, you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, and your mind just starts conjuring up all kinds of weird stuff. He said, yeah, that's probably what it is. You know, we can't see much here with these lights and the fog, and we can't hear anything with the noise of the stream, and we can't feel much in these wetsuits. I think that's what it is. We're just having sensory deprivation, and it's just making our minds run crazy. Well, we can deal with that. Come on, we're cavers here. We're in the biggest thing we've ever been in. We can't go back out and tell them that we wimped out because we got scared. So let's keep going. I said, yeah, let's keep going. It's going. So we got up and we started walking. And I thought about sensory deprivation, but that wasn't much of a help. I began to have that feeling again. And as we walked over the period of the next 30, 40 minutes, that feeling within me began to have some dimension to it. I began to feel as if there were something in that cave up ahead of us, the way we were going. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was something else entirely. Something alien. And the feeling that I began to have was that that entity was ahead of us, and like a spider spins a web to catch the unwary fly, so we were moving toward it, and it was lying in wait for us. And that was messing up my mind. Just telling this story gives me the shivers again, because I find myself back in there with Marty. And we stopped again and we talked a little bit about that, but we began to realize that we were both having some pretty awful feelings, and we didn't need to talk about it. We just kept going. And the further we went, the more I began to realize that we were wandering into a place where no human being had ever been, and into a place that was the realm of something different, something so alien that even to see it would be devastating. And yet we kept going. And I found that I was struggling with my rational mind, which was trying to say, this is all in your mind. and my feelings and my gut and my emotions, which were saying, get out now while you can. But like zombies, we kept walking, deeper and deeper towards whatever horror lay before us. And I was having a little trouble getting a deep breath because I had a brick in my stomach about what we were doing. But I didn't want to turn back. So eventually we came to a place where the big trunk channel sort of ended and we were in a breakdown area. And it wasn't, we poked around, it wasn't very clear which way to go at that point. And so we didn't see any obvious lead on, and I said to Marty, I said, this is far enough. You know, we're both exhausted, we're both ready to get out of this place. And he said, yeah, I agree, this is far enough. And it's just two of us here. We are a long, long way from the entrance, and it's a good time to turn around. So we sat down on this big flat rock just to rest. And as we got ready to leave, he looked behind us and he said, you know, there's a passage right there. It's going right back in the wall. It's you know, walking size passage. We ought to at least go up there a little ways and check it out. And I said, man, I have had it. I said, I can't do that. I said, why don't you go up there and check that out? And, you know, I'll wait here for you. Well, we all do that kind of stuff in caves. You know, you go off for a while, you come back in 20 minutes or whatever. It's not a big deal. You know, everybody meets back at a central point. So we were used to doing that, but that was not a good idea there. I didn't realize it then, but soon I did. So Marty headed on off, and I could see his light flickering and hear him scuffling over the rocks, you know, for a minute or two, and then it was gone. It was silent. And I was sitting there sort of bent over, just, you know, in mental and emotional exhaustion, just trying to be quiet and calm. It was very quiet there. The stream was far away. I could hear my heart beating. It was so quiet. And I sat there for a while, and all of a sudden, from that passage which Marty had gone up, in the midst of that silence, I heard, and my whole life passed in front of my eyes. I'd read that happened, and it did. Scenes from childhood all through my life, because I knew that it had him. Whatever god-awful horror was up there, it had him. And I found myself standing, yelling,
Marty! 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 Hey, Marty!
And I went to take a step toward that passage to go after him, and I couldn't move. My feet were buried in concrete. I was just paralyzed with fear.
Marty!
Nothing. And then I began to hear a noise and finally see a light. And he began coming out. And he didn't look good. His face was white. He was shaking. And he plopped down and he said, oh my God. And I said, Marty. I grabbed him by the shoulder and I said, Marty, what happened to you? And he got his voice back and he said, I went up in that passage about 50, 75 feet, and I got to a ledge, to a little climb up, and I could see that the passage continued. So I started climbing up to that ledge, and I was up 2 or 3 feet off the floor, and my light went out. Just popped out. Carbide light just quit. We've all had that happen. Just blows out. The Hodags do it. And he said, as soon as my light went out, off to the right, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this green, glowing thing. And he said I fell off the ledge, fell down onto the floor, wasn't too far. But I lay there just looking at this thing, my light out in the pure darkness. I finally pulled my flashlight out of my pack. And with shaking hands, I flipped on the beam and pointed it at that thing. And it was a rotting log. It had white moss or something growing on it. And I guess it was phosphorescing or something in the dark. It was just a piece of log. But let's get the hell out of here. And I thought to myself, yes, it was just a piece of log. But whatever awful thing is in here is close. It's close. And so we turned and we started back down that long trek through the stream, through the pools, on the mud banks, to get back to the big room. It was thousands of feet, I don't remember how far. And I don't remember much about that flight, except the urge to run. And how far could you run in a cave before you fell down and broke your kneecap? And so there we were, in the stream, moving as quickly as we could on the slippery rocks, and listening. And every now and then, we would whip back and look behind us, thinking we had heard something. And I got the feeling, if something touched me on the nape of the neck, I'd be gone. I'd be gone. We were in utter panic. When you start whipping around looking for what's gaining on you in the dark, you're pretty much over the edge. And so we were. Sometime later, I have no idea how much time passed, we found ourselves at the flagging tape going up the mountain. We dragged ourselves up the mountain. We lay down on top. There's a flat place there. And we said, let's just lie here for 30 minutes, head on packs. Let's lie here for 30 minutes and rest, and then we'll head out of this damned place. We lay back on the packs. It hadn't been 2 minutes from back the way we had come from, back up where we had just come from. I heard 3 very loud splash, splash, splash. And Marty jumped up and he said, "Did you hear what I heard?" And I said, "Yeah, oh God." And we clambered down that mountain. I don't even remember trying to find footholds. We found ourselves in the stream crossing, and I did not dare look to the right, upstream on that river, from where something horrible was. Finally, we got into the fuller infeeder passage. We went maybe 50, 75 feet up that passage. You know, a comfortable passage, 10, 15 feet in diameter. Came to a little gravel bar, and my light just was down to nothing. My carbide light was just winking out. And I said, "Marty, man, I got to change my light." He said, "Oh man, no, don't stop. We can't stop. We can't stop here. Don't do it." And I said, "I can't see. I can't pull out my flashlight. I got to use my hands. I got to have a light or I'm going to fall over something and break a leg." He said, "Oh God, hurry, hurry." And I knelt down on that gravel bar, pulled out my plastic bag, unhooked the bottom off the light, had my old screwdriver out. I was scraping the carbide out of that light. And again, I'll remember this from now on. I was scraping the carbide out of the light. And from back down in that big room, we could still hear the river rushing down there. From back down in that big room, we heard an awful kaboom! Like a 50-ton boulder had fallen from that unseen ceiling and crashed into the floor. Felt like the whole cave rose up a few inches and settled back. And I think my heart stopped. I don't remember putting carbide in that lamp. I don't remember getting back on my feet. I just remember moving, going fast as we could, which of course wasn't very fast. And my only hope was to get to that water barrier, that low airspace. If we could get past that, maybe that would be some kind of a barrier between us and it. Whatever it was. Time passed slowly. Eventually we got back to the water barrier. I remember very little about that part of the trip. We went through and I didn't feel any better. I looked at Marty and he looked pretty freaked out. I'm sure I was the same way. We eventually got to the waterfalls. We had some trouble climbing the ropes because we were exhausted. We finally got to the top of the waterfalls. It was late. We'd been in 18 hours. We had 6,000 feet to go. I wondered if I could make it. The feeling was still there. It was a pain in my chest and stomach. It was still there. I wondered if it would let us go, if it would let us out of this nightmare. And finally, after plunge pools and sculptured walls and crawling and climbing, I began to smell the outdoors. I began to smell the smell of grass. And we knew we were at the entrance. Maybe we would make it. We finally came out into the sinkhole. It was 3 or 4 in the morning. We looked up there and there were Bill and Jean was standing there. God, you're back. What happened? What happened? We were starting to think we needed to go after you. And they looked at us and they said, oh my God, tell us what happened. We sat down by that miserable little campfire. It was drizzling a light rain. The night was dark. There was no moon. We sat around that campfire and Marty started talking. And he started telling what he was feeling. And the more he told, the worse I felt. Because he had the same feelings I did. The same sensations I did. That something was waiting for us in the darkness. And finally he stopped talking. And there was silence in the group. And I could hear the water trickling down into the entrance of Fuller Cave, just a few feet away. And I felt terrible, shaky, uncertain, utter fear. And I heard a whimpering noise. And I looked over at Bill, who was shaking. Tears were running down his face. And he said these words I will take with me to my grave. Bill said, suppose we have only dreamed that we have come out of the cave, and any moment we're going to wake up and find ourselves still down there.
We should never have gone back into that cave, to be trapped there and drowned in a watery grave. Was it just a bad dream? At least that's how it seems. Dreams never come true, only nightmares do. I'm not scared to tell you that I was afraid, and I'm sure that my friends will tell you the same. Was there something in there, in the damp misty air, coming after them and me? The dark is all I see. I don't ever want to go back to sleep, 'cause I'm not sure I'd wake up from the dream. Is it heaven, is it hell? It's impossible to tell. I only know what I feel, and the nightmare is real. I only know what I feel. The nightmare is real.